Sometimes a courtroom is not just a room filled with laws, procedures, and case numbers. Sometimes it becomes a mirror reflecting the harsh reality of life outside those walls. The case of Red Shield Rentals versus Nadira Hope was one of those moments where the law stood face to face with humanity, and neither side could look away. From the very beginning, there was a sense that this was not going to be a routine eviction hearing. There was something heavier in the air, something unspoken, as if everyone in the room understood that this decision would echo far beyond a single judgment dot at first glance. The case looked simple. Rent had not been paid. The balance due stood at $5,352. Assistance programs had already been exhausted. According to the rules, the landlord had every right to move forward. On paper, the outcome seemed inevitable. But courts do not exist only on paper. They exist in the lives of people, and that is where this case began to unravel. When the plaintiff's attorney, David Frontera, approached the podium, his demeanor immediately set a different tone. He did not speak with aggression or entitlement. Instead, he spoke with caution, almost reluctance. He admitted openly that this was a case he had been dreading all week. That single statement revealed more than any legal argument could. Lawyers dread cases not because they are weak, but because they are heavy. This was one of those cases. He explained to the court that Ms. Hope had already received Emergency Solutions grant funding earlier and also benefited from the Barrier Busters program. As a result, she had reached the maximum allowable assistance under both ESG and county funding limits. He described how the situation came to light late in the process, when the Social Outreach Services Office confirmed that no additional funds could be released. Appeals were made directly to the county, not once, but twice. Each appeal was denied. The decision was not personal. It was procedural. The limits were firm. The numbers could not be stretched out. The attorney made it clear that he had spoken with Ms. Hope personally. He emphasized that she had been respectful, cooperative, and understanding. There was no refusal to communicate, no attempt to exploit the system. This was not a tenant trying to avoid responsibility. This was someone trapped by circumstances far beyond her control. He told the court that every possible avenue had been explored, including reaching out to state agencies to see if additional funding might be available. Nothing had materialized. Then came the sentence that shifted the emotional weight of the room. He stated plainly that the last thing any of them wanted was to evict Ms. Hope. That was not rhetoric. That was resignation. The landlord was not celebrating this case. The attorney was not pushing for punishment. They were standing before the court because the system had no more answers. When Nadira Hope was addressed by the judge, she appeared composed, but her voice carried a quiet exhaustion that cannot be rehearsed. It was the exhaustion of someone who has been fighting for too long without relief. She explained that she had applied for Social Security disability benefits months earlier. Her application had been acknowledged, her documents received, but the status had not changed. It remained in reconsideration, suspended in a bureaucratic limbo that offered neither approval nor denial. Only waiting. She shared that she had recently reached out to an attorney specializing in disability cases, hoping professional intervention might push the process forward. There was a faint sense of hope in her explanation, a belief that maybe help was finally on the way. But hope alone does not pay rent, and it does not keep the lights on. That reality weighed heavily in her words. As she continued, she explained that her medical condition required medication that came with severe side effects. Those side effects made it difficult to function, difficult to work, difficult to stay awake and productive. Faced with the need to earn income to support herself and her child, she made a decision that no one should ever be forced to make. She stopped taking her medication. That moment marked the emotional breaking point of the hearing. The judge interrupted immediately. His voice rose, not in anger, but in urgency. He repeated the word "no" several times, as if trying to halt the damage already done. This was not judicial overreach. This was instinct. The judge recognized instantly that the system had pushed this woman into a dangerous corner. He made it clear that he did not want to hear about her stopping medication for financial reasons. He explained that while money is necessary, life itself is not negotiable. His words were simple but powerful. You have to live in order to need the money. That sentence captured the entire conflict of the case. Survival had become conditional. Health had become a luxury. And the court could not ignore that reality. The judge acknowledged her responsibilities as a mother, her need to provide for her child, and the impossible balance she was being asked to maintain. He spoke candidly about the limitations of his authority, admitting that he could not force her to take medication. But he made it clear that he did not want financial desperation to dictate medical decisions. This was not legal advice. This was human concern. As the hearing progressed, the judge's tone softened. He began to speak less as an official and more as a person who had seen enough life to understand how fragile stability can be. He told Ms. Hope that she was in his prayers, a statement that carried weight not because of its religious nature, but because of its sincerity. He shared wisdom passed down from his family, recalling how his mother and grandparents used to say that sometimes, when no options appear to exist, you still have to find a way forward. That phrase, "make a way out of no way," became the heart of the hearing. It was not a legal principle, but it was a guiding philosophy. It acknowledged that the law does not always account for reality, and that discretion exists for moments exactly like this one. Instead of issuing an immediate judgment, the judge chose to pause the process. He set future hearing dates, signaling that eviction would not proceed that day. He acknowledged objections from the plaintiff, but overruled them, explaining that the court had a responsibility to address how this situation had escalated to this point. He expressed concern that had the issue been addressed earlier, the balance owed would have been lower and assistance easier to coordinate. The judge also indicated a willingness to communicate directly with agencies involved in funding decisions, ensuring transparency and avoiding improper communication. This was not common practice, but the judge recognized that the payment process had become intertwined with the court's role. The system's failure had become part of the legal question. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that this was not about delaying the inevitable. It was about refusing to surrender to inevitability. The judge was not dismissing the landlord's rights. He was exercising discretion to protect the family from immediate harm while exploring every possible solution. This case did not end with a gavel strike or a final ruling. It paused with intention. It paused with hope. And it paused with a clear message. Giving up is not an option until every path has been explored. The courtroom atmosphere during the second phase of this case felt heavier than before, because everyone understood that time itself had become a factor. What had once been a question of unpaid rent had now evolved into a broader examination of how systems respond when a person is already at their breaking point. The judge entered this phase of the hearing fully aware that delay alone would not solve the problem. Delay only mattered if it was used to create opportunity, and the court made it clear that this was exactly what it intended to do. The judge began by addressing the efforts already made by the plaintiff's attorney. He acknowledged that Mr. Frontera had gone beyond what most attorneys would typically do in an eviction case, reaching out to social outreach services, filing multiple appeals, contacting county officials, and even exploring state-level funding were not obligations required by law. They were actions taken because everyone involved recognized the human cost of failure. The judge's acknowledgement was important. It reinforced that this was not a case of neglect or indifference by one side, but a breakdown across multiple layers of assistance. Attention then shifted to the timing of the situation. The judge openly expressed concern that this issue should have been addressed months earlier. Had the assistance limits been identified sooner, the balance owed might have been significantly lower. Smaller amounts were easier to manage, easier to fund, and easier to resolve. By the time the problem surfaced fully, the numbers had grown into something far more difficult to overcome. This was not said to assign blame, but to highlight how delays within systems can quietly create crises that seem sudden when they finally surface in court. The plaintiff's attorney reinforced this point, explaining that earlier intervention could have allowed funding from multiple agencies to be pieced together gradually. Instead of facing a single overwhelming sum, the situation might have been manageable. This was a critical observation because it reframed the case. The problem was not just that Ms. Hope had reached assistance limits. The problem was that the system allowed her to reach those limits without triggering timely intervention. The judge then turned his attention to the agencies involved in the funding decisions. He clarified that he generally avoids direct involvement. In administrative determinations, understanding the importance of boundaries and proper procedure. However, he also recognized that when payment assistance becomes a central issue in an active court case, it is no longer separate from the judicial process. At that point, the court has a responsibility to ensure that decisions affecting housing stability are reviewed with full context. He indicated that if necessary, the court was willing to communicate directly with the decision makers involved, provided that such communication remained transparent and appropriate. This was not about pressuring agencies or overriding rules arbitrarily. It was about ensuring that the full circumstances of the case were understood by those with the authority to grant exceptions. The judge made it clear that any communication would be done openly, with all parties aware, so that fairness and integrity were preserved. Throughout this discussion, Nadira Hope remained quiet, listening as her situation was analyzed in a way she likely had never experienced before. For once, her struggle was not being summarized in a form or reduced to eligibility codes. It was being spoken about in full sentences with empathy and concern. The court acknowledged not just her financial hardship, but the emotional and physical toll of living under constant uncertainty. The judge returned to the subject of her health, emphasizing once again that medical decisions should never be driven by financial desperation. While he respected that she was the best judge of her own body, he made it clear that the court did not want her to sacrifice her long-term well-being in order to survive in the short term. This was a rare moment in which a legal proceeding openly recognized the interconnectedness of health, employment, and housing. The conversation then shifted toward the future. The judge explained that the purpose of setting multiple hearing dates was not to prolong stress, but to create accountability. These dates would serve as checkpoints, moments where progress could be evaluated and new information considered. Whether that progress came from state funding, disability benefits, or agency reconsideration, the court wanted to remain actively involved rather than passively waiting for outcomes. He also addressed the plaintiff directly, acknowledging their right to seek payment and protect their interests. At the same time, he emphasized that justice requires balance. The law allows discretion for a reason, and this was precisely the kind of situation where that discretion mattered. The judge's approach did not dismiss the landlord's concerns, but it refused to prioritize financial recovery over human stability without exhausting every alternative. As the hearing drew toward its conclusion, the judge returned to the theme that had quietly guided his decisions throughout the case. He reminded Ms. Hope of something he had told her before. She should not give up unless he told her to give up. This was not empty reassurance. It was a statement of commitment. The court was not finished exploring solutions, and neither was she. He spoke again about the wisdom passed down from his family, emphasizing that life often presents moments where logic alone offers no answers. In those moments, persistence becomes a form of resistance. Making a way out of no way does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to accept that reality is fixed. When the hearing ended, there was no dramatic resolution, no clear victory or defeat. What remained was something far more meaningful. A mother left the courtroom, knowing she had not been abandoned by the system entirely. A landlord left knowing that their concerns were acknowledged, even if delayed. And the court stood as a reminder that justice is not always about finality. Sometimes, justice is about holding the door open just long enough for hope to walk through. This case stands as a powerful example of what happens when a courtroom chooses to see beyond limits and balances. It shows that while systems are built on rules, they are meant to serve people, not erase them. In a world where it is easy to say there is nothing more that can be done, this judge chose to say something different. He chose to say that as long as there is effort left, there is responsibility left. And in doing so, he transformed an eviction case into a statement about dignity, compassion, and the true purpose of justice.